unique about his story was how he got to a point with it where he was ready to make some money, and that's often where people get caught in the race, isn't it? Because they want to make the next money and the next money and the next money, and he kind of ripped himself out of it, which is the way he described it. Felt to me like that, like he kind of ripped himself out of that. You waiting for my drop?
Yeah.
With the life.
You're lying to me. It's the return of the Hydra.
We're
Once
back.
again. Once again.
Today we're talking Tim Ferriss.
Hydra.
James, what do you know about Tim Ferriss?
Timothy Ferriss?
How did you come across Tim Ferriss?
Well, do you know, I've heard of Tim Ferriss for quite a while now, but I've never delved into any of his work or any of his ideas. I heard a long time ago that he has a very, very big podcast, and I thought nothing more of it because I'm quite busy with Joe Rogan's. And then just before Christmas, I saw that he had an interview with Guy Raz on how I built this. And that's a podcast that I dip in and out of every now and then. And so I gave it a whirl. And like a lot of these characters, you end up going down a few different rabbit holes. So I found out that he's got a very, very popular podcast. Well, just to give it the general description, who's Tim Ferriss? He's an entrepreneur, a writer, a podcaster, an investor. He's a lot of things. He's a difficult person to tie down to one endeavor. He's got a lot of strings to his bow.
Yeah, he's a multi-skilled man. And yeah, because we both came across him on that podcast, wasn't it? And like you say, I like Guy Raz, and I think what's quite heavy with his podcast is Tim Ferriss. When I've delved into one or two of them before, they're long, like Rogan's are, but they don't seem quite as like fun as Rogan's or as casual. They seem quite.
I agree.
They're quite dense and quite heavy. So I think you've really got to be in. I guess you've got to be super clever, or you've got to be really into what they're talking about. It's not as general as Rogan's. But to be honest, from the little ones I've listened to, that is the appeal for me. He kind of gets into this. You know, when you compare him to all these other, you could put him in the self-help category almost, couldn't you, with Tony Robbins and you know, whoever else we've talked about before. But he's like, what was the subject he was talking about? The last thing I listened to with him. Oh yeah, so it was the one I sent you guys about whether being a generalist or a kind of multi-skilled person, which was the best thing to be. And his answer was kind of both, wasn't it? He had an interesting answer.
A specialist or a generalist? A
specialist or a generalist. That's how it was worded. Yeah, but he said about having sort of basically specialising maybe in two things, but not in a field where that's really over swamped with competition. Like his example was basketball, but something like that is good because when you're talking about all these other kind of self-help guys, it all seems a bit fantastical and a bit unrealistic. But that's real good life advice, isn't it? Don't go. You don't often hear like that's not a reach for the stars type of attitude, is it? It's a realistic, like practical advice that if you walk a path untrodden, then you're more likely to have success than what you would be if you went for something crazy like being a basketball player was his example. Yeah, I think he's, I don't know how I'd describe him, a life hacker, a life hackist, definitely lifestyle designer. But his story is very interesting. So briefly, he was kind of stuck in the rat race, wasn't he? Of these ridiculously long days, 7 days a week. He started off in sales after finishing university, and he just seems like a very, very meticulous character. So even in sales, he would be making all these calls all day, and slowly, through logging all of the calls that he made, he worked out exactly what time was the most successful to get leads, to get people on the phone.
and then he refined his script that he used. So he'd write down exactly what he said each time and then refine it depending on if it worked or not in that particular case. And so by recording everything, he's just polished things slowly but surely. And then he opened up his own business in the sort of the sports nutrition industry, and he was just working himself to an early grave with the number of hours that he was doing. He wasn't making tons of money. You know, he was doing quite well, but not tons of money. And then he just decided to find as many ways as he could to work smarter, not harder.
So if I cut in, James, when he, the way I heard his story was that not that he was stuck in the rat race, because it didn't really seem like that was ever his plan, but he'd gone to a normal corporate place to work, and I think he'd used it as he kind of knew what he was doing with it, and it was kind of a stepping stone to build up his network, and before he decided where he really wanted to put all his efforts. That's the way I maybe I've got that wrong, or
so you think
interpreted it wrong.
It was more deliberate.
Yeah, more deliberate. And I think he when he started his sports nutrition thing, he pumped that right up to a point where it was doing really well, and like you say, he was working the way he described it, he was working all hours. What was interesting was when he said he managed to fit in kind of 2 hours of exercise a day. I thought that was unique for someone starting a big business like that. And you've got to remember about this first business that he started, which was kind of a sports nutrition. Was it protein powder and things like that? It was,
I believe so, yeah. They were
something along them lines. But it was before the internet, so it was a completely different ball game. I mean, you've got all these different ones now, haven't you? But yeah, so that's what he did. But what was unique about his story was how he got to a point with it where he was ready to make some money, and that's often where people get caught in the race, isn't it? Because they want to make the next money and the next money and the next money. And he kind of ripped himself out of it, which is the way he described it. Felt to me like that, like he kind of ripped himself out of that. How would you say, like that path? He kind of torn himself off it, even though he could have gone on. I guess the tricky thing to do is you get to a point where you make money, and it probably gets easier to make more and more money than the first lot of money. So it's hard to take yourself out of that. But at the end of the day, what do you want the money for if you're not going to take yourself out of that?
That's the fantastic thing about him, and that's I think his message can be applied to many different people, where he says, well, there's no point getting rich if you've got no time, you've got no energy.
The fat man in the BMW was his
the fat man in the BMW.
He described it. This is what he feared. He didn't want to be the fat man in the BMW who, did very well at business but couldn't think of anything else to do other than do well at business. Yeah, so, you get out of shape and you drive a BMW, and that's sort of all you are. So yeah, when he sold this business, he went off and kind of went off on his next whim, whatever caught him, and but go on.
I believe he didn't sell it for a time. He was still working on it, but he worked out how to make it so efficient that he only had to work a few hours a week, and that's where his book came out. His book is called The 4-Hour Work Week, and I've been sort of dipping in and out of it. And it's full of very, very useful practical suggestions for optimizing your time. Things like cutting out problematic customers. So he said he'd get 50% of his problems from 3% of customers, right? So he just sacked them. He said, look, I don't think we can do business anymore. And he saved a lot of time and a lot of energy. And that freed up a lot of resources for him on a personal level. And then simple things like checking his emails twice a week at an allotted time and communicating that to everybody. It's like, I'm going to check my emails on Monday at 12 o'clock for an hour. So if you don't hear from me by then, don't worry, I'll get back to you. And things like not sitting in useless meetings, which I know, Sal, a little bit. A little bit about, if you can talk about that, or we can cut it out.
Let's not bore people with meeting stories, but
so he's got all these strategies not to stop wasting time, and instead of because sometimes I think we're so keen to save time, but we don't always know what to do with it. We're always looking for these shortcuts and hacks. But he reinvests that into learning skills. For example, another way that I describe him is a fantastic learner of anything, that he really like has that growth mindset, that he believes that he puts in the time and the effort and you know, finds the right experts to help him, and he can learn anything. Like, he went off to Argentina. He was living in Argentina and you know, working remotely, and he learned tango from scratch. And I'm not sure of the exact details, but he became some kind of world champion after a few months. I'm not sure of the exact competition and all that. Kickboxing, language learning. He just sort of throws himself into something and just goes deep and hard on this skill, and gets to proficiency a lot quicker than most people.
Yeah, it's a really interesting guy. What did you listen to any more podcasts that you'd recommend, James?
So my favourite so far, I mean, I'm fairly new to him, as I said, but my favourite so far has been with this philosopher called Alain de Botton. So Alain de Botton. But he's got a French name, but he's a British sort of philosopher. And I actually just bought a book by this chap, Alain de Botton, based on the podcast. And I watched a documentary that this Alain de Botton recommended on the podcast called 7 Up, where they record people every 7 years of their life and look back on their lives. So, I mean, a lot of things came from that podcast, you know, a lot of other sort of really interesting and engaging materials came from that. So, yeah, I've just literally today started that book.
James, what would you say then is the one thing, or are some things you would say makes him stand out as compared, you called him a life hacker, as compared to, let's say, other life hackers? Because now, if you go to YouTube, there seems to have been an emergence of life hackers in all kinds of life situations, for all kinds of life situations, from finances to sports to mental health to whatever it is. And so I also just started myself to read a bit about him, but I wouldn't know necessarily enough to know whether he would be maybe the original life hacker, like if he started the whole trend, or if he does things better, as Josh before mentioned in his podcast, that he goes deeper into topics. So what would you say is, why would it be worthwhile for somebody watching this podcast or listening to our podcast right now to actually check out this guy? What makes him stand apart from other people? Or is there anything at all that makes him, maybe it's just more sympathetic, maybe
go on,
just a nicer guy or something, or more interesting?
Yeah, he is a nice guy. Something about him, I mean, I guess it depends where you're exposed to him, but during the Guy Raz interview, what I was going to say about his Long Dense podcast was that I'd heard of Tim Ferriss a lot before, the same way you had, but the Guy Raz was a nice hour of kind of simple, but not too simple, of his story and his come up. But also he suffered from some deep depression early on, and just stuff about his story along those lines was kind of made it feel like, I don't know, I guess the vulnerability made him more appealing, or like it didn't make maybe his story not seem out of reach, you know? It wasn't as if he had a perfect run and he was just super clever and got himself there, you know? He'd had his troubles. I mean, to be honest, that'd be an interesting 20 minutes if we could look into what that kind of trend that seems to happen, doesn't it, with depression and massive success. But so he does seem like a nice guy. But what I'd say, where he differs from, I haven't seen many life hackers, but like I say, I'll put him in with the self-help guys. And his advice to me just seems less fluffy, and it's all about real life advice that it's simple little things that would accumulate, and you know, they take practice, but all of them compounded would make a hell of a difference, which is what he seems to promote, rather than a kind of nothing seems too quick a fix or too fluffy and fantastical. You know what I mean? It all seems very practical advice, and he's just a straight no BS guy, not in a harsh way, but like I say, he's almost quite dry compared to Rogan, but that's fine because it's good real advice, you know. I would say that was what distinguished him from the.
I agree with you. I agree. He seems extremely genuine, and
right.
Not that the other life hackers aren't. I don't really go around those circles online. But yeah, he just seems very genuine and very curious. And like Den was saying, his podcast is more like a set of interviews where he really wants to find out what his guest can offer him in terms of knowledge and techniques to improve his own life. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that he's the kind of person that he's going to put those things into practice tomorrow. He's not going to wait until everything's perfect, or maybe next year. Or he's very, very practical. And when you read his book, you see that it's just full of really, really practical advice, like a whole chapter on how to save hours a week on emails. And it seems like it's not a glamorous thing to be talking about, but those are hours of your life, and that is really, really useful. I don't know. He just seems like a person who, like Den said, you can relate to. That he's not just talking the talk. That he's walked the walk himself, and he's continuing to walk the walk. He's not the finished article by any means, in his own head, I mean. And he's just a constant learner, and so he sort of sets that example, in a very real sense. But in terms of why is he more popular or more successful than other self-helpers or life hackers or whatever you want to call them, I can't answer that. I'm sure many of them out there do a great job as well, but it's just the way the cookie crumbles, isn't it?
Right. I find it just very curious. I did a little bit of research, but not. I didn't go too deep, and I'm actually looking forward to finding out more about him, especially after we talked about it now, because he seems to be not only an interesting person. I mean, there's a lot of interesting people out there, and I'm sure that he's got a very fantastic story. But there's so much stuff out there. I can't clone myself just to consume more content. I mean, I also want to consume this kind of content in order to improve myself. I'm not just doing it just for the fun of it. I mean, there are aspects of it too, especially Joe Rogan. Maybe if you compare Joe Rogan to somebody like Tim Ferriss, maybe Joe Rogan would be more entertainment very often, even though you then get to know interesting people and delve deeper, and then you maybe get the knowledge that's behind those people. But Tim Ferriss, looking a bit about on his channel and watching the stuff that he's doing. I mean, I find it very curious when these people, they kind of, if you find this broad range of things that are completely unrelated. Like in one video, he talks about how you can read or retain more information from a book that you're reading, and in the next video, he's giving you tips on maybe some sports related stuff and endurance and running, and then another video is something completely unrelated again. And so, I mean, the natural tendency is, of course, to be a bit suspicious if somebody gives you too much advice on too many things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you ever get that? I mean, if there's somebody who basically has discovered everything, or at least everything that they talk about, it seems to be delivered with such a confidence. But then again, I haven't seen enough of his videos. I don't know how he approaches it, and if he's like very transparent. It's like, I'm trying this, and I'm not sure if it's working or. But what I've seen so far, and I'm not judging him or what he's doing. I'm just observing and giving you a report on what I've seen so far. It always makes me a bit skeptical in the beginning. I mean, it was the same with Joe Rogan, and then I got to know him a bit better, not personally, but through doing more research.
Through a friend.
Or Joe. Exactly. Many other people that are out there, I mean, if you read more about them and see more interviews, then I guess you get a better idea, even though you never really know how they really are, in their heads.
Your skepticism, Sal.
It's a healthy skepticism. It's not judgmental.
I suppose the thing that I would say so far is that he doesn't pretend to have discovered all of this information. He's very open about learning from other people constantly and then putting things into practice himself. But yeah, he does have a huge range. So anything that you do during the day, he has some information about it to share.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, where can people? Yes.
Yeah, I guess it was the way that, like, me and James both, but it was by chance, wasn't it? We happened to listen to that podcast in the same day it came out, the Guy Raz one. Yes. I guess because we'd listened to an hour of it, and then probably the algorithm was giving me little 5-minute videos. Like you say, I'd sort of got a deeper understanding of the man. And then the 5-minute videos, you don't just take on their 5 minutes, the merit of the 5 minutes, you know, because you know a bit more about him. It's kind of an extension of that. Whereas if you've only watched the 5-minute videos, yeah, I can understand. I didn't think of it, but while you say that, I guess I think, yeah, why that is no different, is it? It's just little 5-minute snippets of, yeah.
So is there any entry drug that you would recommend to who's listening or watching right now? Any video to start or book?
The Guy Raz, How I Built This podcast, because like I say, it's kind of it's simple but not too simple. It gives you some nice detail about him and some good advice in itself. And then I guess go on to his podcast and just find someone who you like already, because he's got thousands up there. I think he's second biggest podcast next to Rogan, maybe even bigger.
Mm-hmm. I think there
might be one
over 500 episodes now, so you'll find something that interests you.
Yeah, and probably someone who you've been interested in before, and then that's a good way to sort of learn about someone. And then I don't know, who knows? It might be, after a while you might just start listening to him off the back of himself. But
and then the 4-hour work week is his book. He's also come out with kind of a series following that, like the 4-hour body, and it's all about optimizing your time and your energy. I was rolling my eyes a little bit towards the beginning of the book because I didn't feel that it was that practical for someone like me that's not working 9 to 5. But then, as I go on, I see that there are little things that we can all do, even things like meditation, breathing practices, different ways that you approach tasks. You know, how much importance that you give to certain things that can be useful for anyone. So, yes, it's really good.
All right.
Can I finish with a quote, perhaps?
I thought you were singing in the end. Okay. All right. Quote is fine.
Here's a quote from his book. To enjoy life, you don't need fancy nonsense, but you do need to control your time and realize that most things just aren't as serious as you make them out to be. That's a game changer right there.
It's a good quote. It's a good quote. Solid. All right. Well, we got through the 20 minutes of our first podcast in 2021.
Return of the Mac.
Still alive. Still rolling.
Can I give a quick shout out to my man Joseph Brickles, who asked me when the Hydra's returning the other day. He said he likes to listen while he walks his dog. So
hey,
give
Joseph.
me a text, Joe, and let me know you got the shout out. I'm biggest fan.
Thanks, Joe.
Cool, man.
Cheers, guys.
All right, guys, gentlemen. Well, it's good talking to you again. Thanks to everybody who's going to tune in. Leave a comment if you want. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening, then subscribe, share the love with everybody. And we wish you a very successful and good and happy and lovely and healthy 2021. Peace.
Woo.